I once told the truth and was publicly stoned with complimentary toffee wrappers and polite gasps of horror. Welcome to What If Horizons, the podcast where reality takes a sabbatical and fiction dares to file for full-time employment. Today, we step into a world where lies aren't just accepted, they're required. Where telling the truth is more scandalous than public nudity, and honesty isn't the best policy, it's a criminal offense. Imagine a society where the greatest social sin isn't murder, theft, or skipping leg day, but blurting out a fact. In this world, people don't say, "I love your outfit," unless it makes their eyes bleed. They don't say congratulations on your promotion, unless they mean, you are the literal worst person for the job. Lies aren't just lubrication for social interaction. They're the entire engine. Now, how did we get here? Some say it began with politeness. A white lie here, a diplomatic dodge there. No, your haircut doesn't make you look like a shrub. Of course I read the terms and conditions. Yes, I enjoy your acoustic death metal album. Over time, society realized that lies smooth things out. They kept the peace. They protected egos. And more importantly, they avoided feelings, the most dangerous biological weapon known to mankind. So, in this alternative timeline, lying evolved from social grace to social law. Governments ratified it. Schools taught it. Children learned to fabricate before they learned to walk. A baby's first word wasn't mama or dada. It was alibi. By the year 2074, the United Nations passed the Universal Fabrication Act, declaring truth-telling a hate crime in 143 languages. Lie detectors were rebranded as repression encouragement devices and used to punish honesty. Hallmark released a new line of apology cards for people who accidentally told the truth. One bestseller read, "I'm sorry I was sincere. I wasn't thinking." In this world, politicians are revered, not in spite of their lies, but because of their creativity. Elections aren't won by policy or platform, but by who tells the most fantastical story. One candidate famously claimed he descended from a dragon, had lunch with Schrodinger's cat, and personally invented clouds. He won by a landslide. In the workplace, honesty is considered a breach of professionalism. Saying, "This report is overdue because I forgot," would result in immediate termination. The correct response is, "The time-eating quantum goblins intercepted my spreadsheet." You might get a raise for that. Romantic relationships operate on mutual deception, celebrated during annual events like International Delusion Day, where couples exchange lies wrapped in metaphor. Common love notes include, "You're the only one for me in this simulated reality," or "My heart beats solely for you, and definitely not because I fear dying alone." Dating apps use anti-truth algorithms. Profiles are filtered for believability, not accuracy. A man who claims to be a billionaire ninja astronaut with a dolphin farm gets 8,000 matches. The woman who says she enjoys reading quietly on Sundays is banned for vulgar honesty. Of course, there are rebels. Those who whisper truth in alleyways, who dare to say what they actually think, feel, or believe. They're called veritists, and they meet in underground libraries disguised as karaoke bars. Their symbol is a single raised eyebrow and a wrist tattoo that reads, "No, seriously." They're hunted by the Bureau of Narrative Integrity and are routinely shamed in public squares by being forced to wear beige and listen to sincere feedback. Now let's talk education. Schools don't teach facts, they teach fiction fluency. Children are graded on the originality of their fabrications. Math exams include questions like, if Johnny has 3 unicorns and gives one to the tooth fairy, how many gold bricks does he owe the moon? Correct answers are discouraged. The goal is narrative elegance, not accuracy. History books are filled with events that never happened but should have. Like the time Cleopatra invented sushi to seduce Alexander the Great at the Burning Man of Babylon. Science exists in a permanent state of quantum uncertainty. Physicists are paid based on how entertaining their lies are. One Nobel-winning theory explained black holes as the universe's way of taking bathroom breaks. Peer review is less about accuracy and more about performance. Can you lie with style? Religions thrive, not as faith systems, but as competitive fiction leagues. Each year, the World Mythcraft Tournament crowns a deity of the season. Worship is measured in narrative points and costume design. Last year's winner was Zarnok, god of reversible socks. And then there's the language itself. English has evolved into 2 parallel dialects, legalish, and truthlish. Legalish is the official language, flowery, evasive, rich in metaphor. Truthlish is whispered, like a taboo spell. People who speak truthlish risk being labeled gaspers, as in, he gasped at the wedding. Told the groom he didn't love the bride. The horror. But here's the twist. In a society built entirely on lies, the most powerful weapon becomes truth. Not because it's right, but because it's rare. It shocks. It offends. It unsettles. Imagine a dinner party where everyone is praising the hostess's delightfully crunchy lasagna, and someone dares say, "It's raw and tastes like despair." Utter silence. Glasses shatter. A cat faints. And somewhere, an honesty alarm goes off. The curtain's up, the lies are flying, and the truth is hiding in plain sight like a naked mime at a masquerade ball. The moment was historic, not because of what was said, but because of the absolute chaos that followed. It happened during the final round of Truth or Dare, Supreme Edition, the most watched reality show in the world, where contestants compete to tell the most flamboyant lies or complete tasks of mind-numbing absurdity. The reigning champion, Velvet Rainstorm, a professional illusionist, part-time astrologer, and self-proclaimed reincarnation of Cleopatra's therapist, was expected to defend her crown. Her opponent was an underdog, a soft-spoken, bespectacled man named Glenn. Nobody knew his last name. His bio listed his hobbies as walking, being accurate, and not being a fan of unnecessary flourishes. Viewers assumed he was a comic plant. His line round one. "I invented gravity, but gave credit to Newton because I was busy that day." Judges snorted their caviar. Not because it was clever, because it lacked flair. Then came the final round. Velvet told a stunning story about giving birth to the moon during a transcendental origami session while skydiving into the Bermuda Triangle. The crowd erupted in tears. Judges waved gold-painted maracas. Even a sentient jellyfish who served as the emotional barometer of the show turned pink with admiration. Then it was Glenn's turn. He looked into the camera, cleared his throat, and said, "I am not who you think I am. I am just a man. I am afraid. I don't know how to lie like the rest of you. And I think the moon is just a rock." Silence. The audience stared, not in confusion, but in visceral panic. One child screamed so hard he sneezed out his childhood. Velvet Rainstorm collapsed into a pile of velvet and rain. One judge started convulsing, not from rage, but from exposure to direct, unvarnished sincerity. The jellyfish exploded. The network cut the feed. Government censors immediately labeled Glenn a Level 7 censurator. His image was blurred retroactively across all screens. Social media replaced every mention of him with a picture of a cucumber riding a bicycle. No one knew if it was punishment or metaphor. But something had shifted, because now truth had a name, a face, a moment, and like forbidden fruit, it became dangerously interesting. Secret fan pages appeared in the digital shadows. Glenn Truthers began meeting in augmented reality caves, disguised as digital meditation rooms. They didn't worship him, they were just curious. What if he was right? What if the moon was just a rock? What if reality didn't need embellishment to be meaningful? Naturally, the government responded with the Truth Suppression Act, doubling the fines for sincerity and tripling the budget for creative writing departments. Schools banned nonfiction. Libraries removed all reference books and replaced them with choose-your-own-delusion novels. Weather forecasts became interpretive dance performances. GPS systems gave poetic directions. Turn left at the place you first felt unloved. But people were beginning to notice things, like how lying all the time was exhausting. How maintaining 6 versions of reality just to order a sandwich was starting to affect mental health. Therapy sessions became avant-garde theater, where clients and therapists outlied each other until someone wept from not knowing what was real. And then came the rise of the tell lists, a rogue group of ex-philosophy majors, disgraced journalists, and retired fact-checkers. Their motto, Veritas in lunacy, or truth through madness. They would crash dinner parties and whisper harmless facts. That wine's from a box. He never graduated. Your dog hates jazz. Nothing violent, just factual. But in a society allergic to truth, even mild honesty was explosive. Meanwhile, capitalism thrived on the lie economy. Truth-proofing services became a booming industry. For a small fee, Companies would rewrite your autobiography into a dazzling piece of fiction. Memory banks were offered in monthly subscriptions, allowing customers to upload fake memories of vacations they never took, achievements they never earned, and lovers who never existed. Celebrities didn't give interviews. They delivered mythopoetic manifestos, each more dazzlingly false than the last. One claimed to be allergic to time. Another insisted she was raised by wolves, but never barked once out of politeness. Children's books included titles like The Boy Who Cried and Was Immediately Arrested and Snow Lie and the Seven Accusations. Honesty was depicted as a disease in cartoons. Characters who told the truth developed glowing warts and exploded in a puff of unbearable sincerity. But the cracks were forming, not because of Glenn alone, but because once people saw the truth, they couldn't unsee it. Like a glitch in a video game or a typo on a sacred scroll, it gnawed at the edge of their programmed perception. Small acts of sincerity started spreading. A barista accidentally told a customer that their latte was burnt. A mother admitted she hated bedtime stories. A politician hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering a question. That hesitation? It was treason. In next part, we'll venture deeper into the rebel underworld, where truth is hoarded like contraband, and where the most dangerous phrase anyone can utter is, "I meant that." The rebel underworld didn't look like you'd expect. There were no trench coats, no dark alley handshakes, and not a single slow-motion explosion set to classical music. No, the revolution of truth looked more like a bookstore, tucked between a taxidermy cafe and a yoga studio where people stretched their emotions instead of their limbs, stood an unassuming building with peeling letters that once read newsstand. The sign had been tampered with, rearranged periodically to confuse surveillance algorithms. On Monday it read Sand News. By Friday, Insan. Locals just called it the shelf. Inside, the air smelled of old pages, questionable wisdom, and mild mildew. Rows of ancient books with spines warped from suppression sat in defiance of mandated fiction. A woman behind the counter, glasses, buzz cut, a face lined by both laughter and suppression, looked up from a chessboard where she was losing to herself. "Password?" she asked. The visitor whispered, sincerely. Her eyes narrowed. She leaned forward and said, "I hope you're lying. That was the test. If you weren't getting in." Down a spiral staircase lined with rejected encyclopedias, past a hallway lit only by blinking neon signs shaped like punctuation marks, you'd find the Veritas cell. It wasn't a room. It was a feeling. A space where people dared to speak what they believed was actually true, and not metaphorically, symbolically, or ironically true. Just factual. The meetings were awkward. People hadn't practiced honesty in years. Some stuttered. Others sweated profusely. One woman fainted after saying, "I don't like my job," out loud. They clapped for her bravery and gave her a juice box. They weren't planning a revolution. They were just remembering how it felt to say, "I'm tired," instead of "I'm thriving." To whisper, "I don't know," instead of fabricating a thesis. To admit, "I miss you," without dressing it up as an ironic meme. But above them, the world carried on, wrapped in the silk of carefully curated falsehoods. At weddings, vows included phrases like, "I will always exaggerate your virtues and deny your flaws." At funerals, eulogies were judged by the volume of gasps, not by closeness to reality. One man was described as the inventor of fire and love. No one questioned it. They applauded. Even therapy had adapted. Clients didn't confess real pain. They created imaginary ones for dramatic effect. One woman claimed she was haunted by the ghost of an emotion she had never felt. Her therapist nodded solemnly, awarded her 3 courage stickers, and recommended 12 sessions of abstract interpretive silence. In this society, the truth wasn't just dangerous, it was inefficient. Algorithms couldn't market to honesty. You can't sell ads to someone who actually knows what they want. Commerce thrives on confusion, insecurity, and aspirational delusion. And truth is the enemy of need. But the government wasn't stupid. They knew something was brewing. The Ministry of Fabrication deployed drones disguised as motivational posters. They floated through cities, whispering affirmations like, "You are your best version of someone else's expectations." Schools introduced loyalty oaths pledging allegiance to subjective reality and the post-truth manifesto. Every citizen had to wear mood badges, emotion filters that turned inner turmoil into holographic smiles. Yet, despite the oppression, the Veritists were growing. Small, subtle rebellions began appearing. Graffiti appeared on bathroom stalls, not in symbols or protest slogans, but in confessions. I hate brunch. I never finished that book. Sometimes I just want to be quiet. In elevators, people stopped pretending to enjoy small talk. They stood in silence. Not awkwardly, but intentionally. A teacher was caught assigning an actual nonfiction book. He was arrested mid-lecture while describing the water cycle. His last words before being dragged away were, "Evaporation is not a metaphor." The regime's response was swift. They launched Project Palatable, a campaign to soften reality by filtering it through narrative haze. Scientists were forced to wear clown wigs to appear less intimidating. Weather reports turned into bedtime stories. Medical diagnoses had to be sung. But lies, like sugar, lose their flavor when overused. People were beginning to crave something else. Something bitter. Something real. Then, late one night, a signal interrupted every broadcast. It wasn't flashy. No explosions. No slogans. Just a grainy black and white feed of a man sitting at a desk. Glenn. He looked older now. Tired. His hair thinner. His eyes more focused. "I'm not here to start a war," he said. "I'm not asking for revolution. I'm just asking, what would happen if we all told the truth for just one day? Just one." And then the screen went black. The world froze. Then laughed. Then trembled. It was dubbed Truth Day, though the official government term was 24-hour national narrative pause. The administration didn't endorse it, of course. They merely permitted it, the way one might permit a toddler to wear socks on their hands. Curious, harmless, probably doomed. Truth Day was marketed with mandatory disclaimers. Billboards screamed, "Participate at your own peril. Sincerity is not insured." News anchors wore expressions of amused concern, like scientists about to let kindergartners operate a particle accelerator. Some companies gave employees the day off. Others charged double and offered lie-neutralizing helmets. The morning of, people woke with an unfamiliar sensation. Anxiety, not from what they might hear, but what they might say. The silence was deafening. For once, phones didn't buzz with flattery, exaggeration, or inspirational quotes stolen from long-dead philosophers and recently fired influencers. Social media went eerily quiet. No filters. No curated brunch photos. Just one chilling post. "I'm tired of pretending." By 8 a.m., chaos had begun. At a cafe in downtown Neo-London, a barista handed a customer their latte and said, "I resent you for never tipping, and this milk is expired." The customer blinked, nodded solemnly, and tipped 5 credits before backing out slowly. At an upscale fashion store in Tokyo, a stylist whispered, "Those pants make your legs look like melted breadsticks." The customer responded, "I've always known," and bought them anyway, because now it was real. A kindergarten teacher in Chicago began the day by announcing, "Today, we will learn nothing useful, and I only got this job because my sister married the principal." The children burst into applause. They had long suspected. In the corporate sphere, disaster unfolded in real time. Boardrooms collapsed under the weight of candor. Executives admitted they had no idea what the quarterly goals meant. Middle managers confessed their KPI reports were PowerPoint fan fiction. One CEO stood up during a press conference and announced, "Our company mission is to squeeze you like juice boxes until you can no longer afford dental care." Stocks plummeted, not because of scandal, but because investors heard truth and panicked. Transparency isn't marketable. You can't build profit on plain-spoken honesty unless you slap a rustic label on it and charge triple. The entertainment industry fared worse. Actors refused to say lines they didn't believe in. One rom-com halted mid-shoot when the lead actress looked into her co-star's eyes and said, "You have the emotional depth of lukewarm soup, and I don't love you, even in pretend." Audiences, watching live, wept. Not from heartbreak, but relief. Finally, someone said what they thought we all felt. On reality television, contestants on the realest island began to implode. One said, "I don't even know why I'm here. I just wanted free protein bars and Instagram deals." Another shouted, "I've hated every challenge and I cheated during the coconut fire puzzle." The host collapsed. Paramedics arrived. Not from injury, but secondhand honesty shock, the leading cause of spontaneous vulnerability. But it was in personal relationships that Truth Day delivered its cruelest comedy. Spouses looked across breakfast tables and said, "I've resented you since the honeymoon, and your laugh makes my spine retract." Children admitted they liked one parent more. Grandparents confessed they had favorites and always did. Neighbors revealed how often they fantasized about replacing each other's lawn gnomes with passive-aggressive scarecrows. Weddings were canceled. Divorces were accelerated. Entire friendship circles collapsed under the weight of long-suppressed group chat screenshots. Still, amidst the wreckage, something strange blossomed: laughter. Real, unfiltered, chest-deep laughter. The kind that makes you snort and reevaluate your life choices. People realized something they hadn't felt in years: relief. There was no script, no obligation to perform. For a brief, luminous moment, the world exhaled. But not everyone was thrilled. The Ministry of Fabrication called an emergency session, condemning Truth Day as a dangerous flirtation with objective reality. They accused Glenn of inciting intellectual terrorism and banned his likeness from all entertainment platforms. Ironically, this only made him more famous. Memes exploded. "I'm with Glenn" t-shirts sold out, despite the fact that no one could actually prove what Glenn looked like anymore. A popular slogan emerged: "I'd rather be hurt by the truth than massaged by your fiction." It was immediately banned. But truth, like a cockroach in a five-star restaurant, once seen, can't be unseen. People returned to lies, yes, but with less enthusiasm. Fabrications felt heavier. Compliments took longer to form. Insults softened into questions. Even gossip began to sound like anxious confessions. The world didn't flip upside down. It merely tilted, just enough for water to spill over the edge of the carefully crafted narrative dam. The regime struck back before the last echo of Truth Day had fully faded. They didn't announce it with tanks or bombastic speeches. No, they did what any respectable authoritarian system would do when faced with a crisis of consciousness. They launched a rebranding campaign. It began with a press conference hosted by the Minister of Fabrication herself, a woman so surgically refined and syntactically precise that even her laughter sounded pre-recorded. She appeared on every screen simultaneously, her hair like a museum exhibit, her smile carved from marble dipped in Vaseline. "Fellow believists," she began, using the regime's preferred term for citizens who agreed not to question things too much. "Yesterday, our society experienced an unfortunate malfunction in narrative cohesion. But fear not. The Department of Reality Curation has prepared an antidote, Clarity Correction Week." The program was breathtaking in scale. Schools introduced a new curriculum titled Creative Memory Enhancement. History was rewritten with more pizzazz. The Great Depression was now the slight economic slump with strong character development. Science books redefined gravity as a suggestion with commitment issues. Even math was rebranded. 2 plus 2 no longer equaled 4. It equaled whatever feels empowering. Religions cooperated. Sermons were reissued to include metaphorical fire and symbolic brimstone. Ancient texts were updated with emojis and hashtags to make them more digestible. One new holy book featured a parable about a talking ATM who guided a prophet through a retail awakening. Corporations were even more enthusiastic. Marketing firms rolled out campaigns like "Honesty is overrated, lie better, live brighter." A toothpaste brand launched a line called Plaque and Prejudice, claiming it could remove sins and skepticism. Fast food chains bragged about using 127% beef, which mathematicians tried to protest until their PhDs were revoked and replaced with honorary certificates in abstract nutrition. Meanwhile, Glenn had vanished. Not literally, he was everywhere. Graffiti, stickers, whispered bedtime stories. Children reenacted his infamous "Moon is just a rock" speech with dramatic pauses and cardboard moons. His face was etched on bathroom mirrors using condensation and defiance. A digital recreation of his voice was uploaded to the dark web, reading poetry made entirely of unpopular opinions. And that's when it happened. During an innocuous classroom lesson on emotionally appropriate geography, a 6-year-old boy named Rafi raised his hand. His teacher, mid-monologue about how Antarctica was created by introverts needing space, stopped and nodded. "Yes, Rafi." Rafi stood, cleared his throat, and said, "What if we just told the truth sometimes? Not all the time. just when it's important. Silence. You could hear the metaphorical air leave the room. The chalk snapped in the teacher's hand. One student fainted into their desk, while another began reciting ad jingles to restore emotional equilibrium. Rafi was detained within minutes. He was escorted by agents wearing smiley face masks and matching empathy-neutral uniforms. His parents were fined for negligent fact exposure. The school was declared a zone of narrative reinforcement. Therapy puppies were brought in to help students unsee what they'd heard. But the moment had already gone viral. Someone had recorded it. Not with a camera. Those were illegal in classrooms, but with a memory. And that memory, passed from person to person, retold in 10-second bursts, became legend. Rafi, the boy who dared to wonder aloud. In response, the regime rolled out stricter protocols. Mood tracking became mandatory. Smart mirrors offered compliments, but reported any expression that even hinted at doubt. Surveillance furniture was introduced. Your couch knew if you sat in silence for too long. Your fridge reported snack choices that didn't align with your projected persona. But despite the crackdown, more whispers emerged. A hairdresser in Madrid stopped recommending hairstyles based on astrological compatibility and started saying things like, "This cut won't flatter your jawline, but it'll feel honest." A baker in Nairobi labeled their pastries with brutally accurate names: dry scone, regret croissant, probably not worth it muffin. People were experimenting, not full truth. That was still dangerous, but small, experimental honesty. Like dipping a toe into cold water just to feel something. Husbands told their wives, "I didn't like the casserole, but I appreciated the effort." Friends said, "I didn't laugh because I didn't get the joke." One man even texted, "I ghosted you because I panicked," and society nearly imploded from the sheer force of authenticity. The regime responded by releasing a new VR game, Liar's Paradise. Players could escape into a world where reality bent to their desires. You could be the hero, the lover, the CEO, the philosopher, without ever confronting your real reflection. It was addictive. Entire cities tuned in, plugging into digital illusions while their bodies slowly forgot how to blink. But the rebels had a new plan. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even particularly smart. It was just persistent. Every hour, on the hour, they released one verified fact into the public consciousness. Just one. Nothing huge. Just a fact. The sky is blue. Bananas have potassium. Water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. At first, the facts were met with laughter. Then confusion. Then curiosity. And then, something terrifying happened. People began to remember. It turns out that the most subversive act in a world of lies is remembering. Not remembering heroically, with swelling orchestras and slow-motion montages. No, the quiet kind. The dangerous kind. The kind that creeps in while you're brushing your teeth and suddenly whispers, "Wait a minute, I didn't vote for that." The regime had long ago understood that memory was volatile, which is why they'd launched the Department of Chronological Enhancement. Its task was simple: retouch the past. Not delete it. No, deletion is clumsy. Instead, they added filters, softened edges, replaced facts with more palatable interpretations. Think of it like Photoshop for history, except instead of clearing acne, it removed accountability. So when the truth rebels began releasing one real fact every hour, it wasn't the content that terrified the regime, it was the pattern. A memory unlocked is contagious. One minute you're recalling that water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, and the next you're questioning whether that televised moon hug between rival presidents was actually just two actors in latex. At first, the regime countered with memory hygiene PSAs. These featured smiling influencers reminding citizens that overthinking is a gateway to discomfort, and that you are your best self when you accept the curated truth. But discomfort was exactly what people started craving. After years of saccharine lies and hyperactive positivity, raw uncertainty tasted refreshing. The public grew bolder. One man in Helsinki publicly declared that he remembered when climate change was more than just a themed escape room. A grandmother in Rio recalled when coffee was considered a beverage, not a legal performance enhancer. A teen in Delhi dared to say, on live stream, "I remember when I liked things because I liked them, not because they aligned with my online persona." For this, she was briefly exiled to the island of corrective dreams, a punishment facility disguised as a wellness retreat. She returned a week later with glowing skin, overly straight teeth, and a mysterious twitch in her eye. When asked what she'd learned, she replied, "I am satisfied. I am satisfied. I am satisfied." Then she tried to eat a cactus. But the memories kept surfacing. At dinner tables, families stopped reciting the government's daily conversation prompts. "What makes you feel acceptably unique?" And started asking, "Do you remember when we used to be able to disagree without tactical empathy disclaimers?" Relationships imploded in the most honest way imaginable. Couples discovered they had never liked the same movies. Parents admitted their children weren't all equally gifted. Roommates confessed they were responsible for the mysterious broken mug, the missing socks, and the smell in the microwave. It was glorious, and it was horrifying. The government's final countermeasure was brutal in its simplicity. They introduced a new synthetic supplement called Oblivix, an over-the-counter memory softener sold in delightful pastel packaging. Marketed as emotional decluttering, it promised to help you forget unpleasant realities like unpaid parking tickets, childhood trauma, and the true ingredients of hot dogs. Oblivix was mandatory for all public employees and offered free at universities, weddings, and funerals. One cheerful ad showed a bride swallowing a pill before the ceremony, then saying, "I do think this is what I want." But not everyone was swallowing it. Pockets of resistance blossomed into full communities. They met in sincerity sanctuaries, underground venues with no Wi-Fi, no mood lighting, and, worst of all, no ironic detachment. People sat in circles and said things like, "I feel lonely," or "I'm confused about who I am," or "I kind of miss the pretense but also hate that I miss it." They cried. They laughed. One man admitted he liked pineapple on pizza and was hugged instead of canceled. In one sanctuary, a woman named Layla read aloud from a diary she had kept since before the truth ban. It was messy, misspelled, self-indulgent, but real. Her voice trembled as she spoke about a friend she'd lost, not to war or illness or even ideology, but to artificial affection. "We smiled through everything," she read, "until we couldn't remember what we were smiling about." Her words spread, not viral, not explosive, just quietly persistent. Like mold on a castle wall, the foundation of falsehood, once proud and polished, began to crumble. Then came the moment the regime feared most. A public employee, one of their own, went off script. During a live broadcast of morning mood tones, the anchor, beaming with synthetic enthusiasm, was supposed to say, "Start your day with self-affirming fabrications." Instead, he blinked, stared into the camera, and muttered, "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." The feed cut instantly. His name was erased from the National Registry. But the damage was done. People saw it. Not just the words, but the crack, the split in the narrative. If he could doubt it, maybe it wasn't treason to wonder. The Ministry of Fabrication declared a level orange reality hazard. Emergency broadcasts ordered citizens to increase their narrative alignment practices. Schools resumed teaching toddlers how to simulate conviction. Police patrolled neighborhoods enforcing emotional coherence. Even digital pets were updated to bark affirmations instead of barking. But truth was out, and it was breeding. Once a lie begins to unravel, it does not do so politely. It does not ask for permission or wait for a convenient political season. It bursts like a pipe under pressure, hissing steam and truth into rooms that were never meant to feel humidity. The unraveling began, of all places, in the National Museum of Approved History. A tour guide, exhausted from years of saying the same 30 scripted sentences per hour, decided to improvise. As she stood beside the holographic exhibit of the day all wars ended simultaneously through a coordinated hug, she blurted, "That's not how it happened." Then, horrified, she covered her mouth as if she had coughed up a confession. But it was too late. A 12-year-old visiting from Sector 8 shouted, "I knew it." Security was called. The tour guide was arrested for narrative treason, a charge slightly worse than tax evasion, but less severe than mismatched branding. But before she was dragged off, she yelled, "Look in the archives. The real archives. Room 14, which was odd, because there was no Room 14, at least not on the map. Naturally, thousands went looking. They found it. Behind a fake janitor's closet and a wall of smiling portraits of past ministers of fabrication, There was, indeed, a Room 14. Inside were dusty terminals, old reels of footage, and shelves stacked with physical documents, the kind that couldn't be edited remotely or overwritten with a firmware update. And there it was, proof. Real, raw, unsanitized history. Grainy footage of protests the regime had claimed were parades. Newspaper clippings that documented scandals later revised into fairy tales. Photos of political figures in compromising situations without a single approved hashtag in sight. The truth wasn't just a theory anymore. It was tangible. Word spread with the velocity of suppressed guilt. People began to question everything. Not just the big myths, like the idea that the economy was powered by civic optimism, but the small, daily lies that formed their identities. One man looked at his wardrobe and said, "I don't even like teal." A woman confessed that she'd been pretending to enjoy minimalist cuisine even though she missed food that tasted like something. The backlash came fast. The Ministry of Fabrication blamed the breach on unauthorized temporal nostalgia. They claimed Room 14 had been a performance art installation meant to teach the dangers of unchecked curiosity. The guide was declared an experimental truth actor and posthumously awarded the Medal of Conceptual Loyalty. No one believed it, which was, of course, illegal. Suddenly, lying wasn't just encouraged, it was mandatory. A new civic duty called Falsehood Fridays was introduced, during which every citizen was required to tell at least one verifiable lie to 3 people. Failure to lie was punishable by mandatory mindfulness sessions and a mandatory friendship with someone from human resources. Meanwhile, children, who had long been the most creative liars, began to experiment with honesty. When asked if they enjoyed their state-approved educational cartoons, one girl replied, "No. I think the protagonist has unresolved attachment issues and the moral lessons are emotionally manipulative." Her teacher wept with pride and was promptly fired. Things began to fracture. News anchors started blinking in Morse code. A new underground channel, the Veritas Vlog, appeared, featuring citizens anonymously recounting facts from their lives. "I don't want to be a professional wedding guest anymore," said one. "I never believed my dog had a social media following," said another. "I've been pretending to understand wine for 15 years, sobbed a third. Even the AI systems buckled. Narrative assistant devices, NADs, began glitching. Instead of soothing lies, some offered unsolicited honesty. One device, when asked if the user looked good in their outfit, responded, "That depends. Are you going to your ex's funeral or a post-apocalyptic farmer's market?" Another NAD, when asked for a motivational quote, offered, "Statistically, you'll fail. But hey, someone has to." The regime, desperate, tried to reboot society's confidence. They introduced hypertruth tech, a wearable device that delivered tiny electric shocks whenever a person came too close to an unfiltered fact. It was marketed as truth aversion therapy. Early adopters reported side effects including facial twitches, philosophical migraines, and the sudden ability to detect sarcasm at a molecular level. But the damage was done. At a live press conference meant to restore public trust, the Minister of Fabrication was asked a simple question by a journalist. "Do you actually believe what you're saying?" For a moment, just a flicker, she hesitated. The cameras caught it. The nation froze. The delay was only a second, but in a world built on narrative timing, that second was catastrophic. People didn't riot. They didn't protest. They did something far worse. They stopped reacting. The regime relied on engagement, likes, shares, outrage, applause. But now, their content was met with silence. When lies lose their audience, they become monologues shouted into the void. It is said that nature abhors a vacuum. What's less often said, but more terrifyingly true, is that culture absolutely panics in one. When the regime's lies lost their audience and the truth remained radioactive, what filled the silence wasn't enlightenment, it was noise. Glorious, unfiltered, unmoderated noise. Conspiracy theories mutated like viruses with gym memberships. Spiritual movements erupted faster than you could unfollow them. One particularly popular group claimed that the moon was Earth's emotional support rock and demanded therapy sessions be held every full moon to rebalance planetary empathy. Meanwhile, ordinary people tried to piece together some sort of personal reality. Without official lies to guide them, they improvised. Some returned to ancient traditions, rituals, folklore, ghost stories, anything with a whiff of narrative structure. Others made up their own truths. A woman in Berlin declared that her cat was a reincarnated philosopher. Her TikTok exploded. Soon, feline Socratic therapy became a billion-dollar industry. In a park somewhere in Canada, a man dressed as a tree gave lectures to squirrels and occasionally people. His topic, the barking truth, how trees have always known. He sold bark chips as souvenirs. Each chip, he claimed, held the memory of a forgotten truth. He never sold the same chip twice. Somehow, people believed him. Then came the nihilist movement, a sleek, minimalist belief system that preached that everything was fake. So why not make it aesthetic? Its followers wore all-white outfits, refused to use verbs in conversation, and communicated primarily through curated size. Their headquarters was a cube made entirely of reflective glass and anxiety. With no dominant narrative, reality became choose-your-own-adventure. Facts were collectible items, traded like rare Pokemon cards. People hosted honesty speakeasies, where admission required a single truth whispered through a confession slot. Some entered and never came out. Others came out visibly older, as if a lifetime of repressed facts had been exorcised in one night. And amid all this chaos, the regime floundered. Deprived of their central control, their Ministry of Fabrication attempted a full brand reboot. They renamed themselves the Department of Interpretive Realities and offered new slogans like "Truth isn't dead, it's just evolving." They launched a new social app, Liar, where people could post curated delusions and receive badges for creativity. It lasted 6 days before imploding in a scandal involving a unicorn breeder, a falsified asteroid, and a three-way marriage between a chatbot, a bonsai tree, and the idea of freedom. But while the regime spiraled into absurdist bureaucracy, a subtler force was taking root. Memory, the kind that couldn't be digitized. Not the kind you shared, but the kind that stared at you in the mirror. That lingered in the silence between ads. That whispered at 3 a.m. when the power blinked out and your smart speaker coughed in binary. People began to feel their memories again. Raw, jagged recollections of what it meant to be sincere. To be wrong. To hurt someone and not dress it in irony. To want something so badly it made you ugly. It was disorienting. In a town council meeting somewhere deep in Zone 13, an elderly man stood up and said, "I don't know what's true anymore, but I miss my brother." That was it. No applause. No hashtags. Just a sentence with a pulse. Others followed. A teenager admitted they didn't want to be exceptional, just liked. A factory worker confessed he'd been pretending to enjoy motivational posters in the break room for 15 years. A woman sobbed as she admitted she had never actually liked her influencer career and didn't want to narrate her meals anymore. And then came the strange shift. No one corrected them. No one interrupted with, "Well, actually," or suggested a filter, or weaponized vulnerability into a monetizable brand. People just sat there, listening, processing. It was chaos. Beautiful, terrifying chaos. Because without official stories, without designated villains or state-approved virtues, people had to decide who they were. Not based on roles or metrics, but on something they hadn't used in generations, instinct. At the same time, the infrastructure of deception crumbled. The algorithmic engines that had once filtered news into palatable untruths began malfunctioning. One AI news anchor began ending every broadcast with, "But what do you believe?" and refused to stop until it was unplugged by a crying intern. Public monuments began corroding, not physically, but symbolically. People stopped saluting the giant bronze statue of Citizen Average and started using it as a climbing wall for children. And then, something unexpected. Silence. Not the enforced kind, not the terrified kind, but the thoughtful kind. People paused before speaking. Took longer to write messages. Some began to ask questions without already having a position. And in that pause, something began to grow. Not belief, not dogma, but humility. No dying empire fades quietly, especially not one that's built on beautiful lies, polished narratives, and the delicate machinery of mass self-delusion. And so, the regime made its final move. Not with force, not with propaganda, but with something far more dangerous, nostalgia. They branded it the Great Coherence. Across every remaining screen, billboard, cereal box, and yoga mat, the campaign launched in synchronized perfection. A single, saccharine question, "Remember when everything made sense?" It was followed by a cascade of doctored images, smiling families holding clearly empty mugs labeled truth, children reciting the national pledge of subjective certainty, elderly couples wearing matching LITOME sweaters with glowing comfort. Then came the incentives. Subscriptions to the Coherence Cloud promise to simplify your worldview for a modest monthly fee. You could opt in to receive daily certainties, filtered to match your preferences, identity group, trauma profile, and birth month. It's not a lie. The slogan went, "It's your version of the truth." It worked. For a while. People were tired. Truth is messy, unpredictable, full of jagged edges. Lies, on the other hand, are like luxury bedding, overpriced but comforting. A sizable portion of the population flocked back to the warm glow of curated belief. They embraced being told who to blame, what to feel, when to laugh. And in exchange, they only had to surrender one small thing, their capacity to doubt. But doubt is not so easily deleted. In places where the coherence signal faltered, mountains, underground shelters, awkward elevators, people whispered still. In the silence left by collapsing narratives, they asked forbidden questions. Why do I want what I want? Who told me this mattered? Is that thought mine or something I bought in a dopamine clearance sale? Meanwhile, the regime began installing reflectors, towering digital obelisks in every major city. Officially, they were described as harmony amplifiers. Unofficially, they were enormous black monoliths designed to reflect your own curated image back to you, only shinier. People began posing beside them. Some wept. Some proposed marriage. Some threw rocks. A new phenomenon emerged, emotional lag. With reality splintered, people began reacting to events hours or even days later. A man at a funeral burst into laughter, only to sob uncontrollably during a supermarket checkout 2 days later. Emotional consistency became outdated. Therapists released disclaimers. All feelings are valid, especially if they're 2 weeks late. And amid the noise, a rumble began. A real one. Because in this world where lies once built cities and truths lived underground, the very foundation began to shift. Physically, not metaphorically. The earth, having been ignored, romanticized, exploited, rebranded, and finally reimagined, decided enough was enough. Storms became opinionated. Rivers rebelled against their GPS. Bees began spelling cryptic messages in pollen across windowsills. Truth itches, read one. We see you, read another. Animals stopped participating in metaphors. You could no longer say quiet as a mouse without a furious field rodent delivering a rebuttal via podcast. And then chaos. The reflectors began malfunctioning. Instead of reflecting curated images, they began displaying raw data, unfiltered emotions, unpaid debts, the number of times you've silently screamed into a salad. Couples broke up in front of them. Strangers embraced. A man married himself after the reflector told him, "You've always been enough, Gary." The Department of Interpretive Realities panicked. They issued mandatory truth suppression goggles, claiming they filtered optical noise. In reality, they just made everyone look like motivational posters. People began bumping into furniture, confusing plants for friends, and mistaking their own reflections for enemies. Then, quietly, the real rupture came. A young girl named Unia, who had never learned to lie fluently, simply stood on a milk crate in a city square and said, "I'm scared, but I want to know what's real, even if it's ugly." No slogans, no hashtags, just a voice, uncertain and human. People stopped, listened. Some cried. One man fainted. The reflector behind her shattered, not exploded, just cracked, as if embarrassed to be caught pretending. And from that moment, truth became less radioactive. Not safe, not comfortable, but tolerated. People began experimenting with sincerity like it was a newly discovered drug. They tried it in small doses. I don't actually want this promotion. I hate kale. I miss my ex, but only on Thursdays. The regime was officially irrelevant by then. Its last broadcast, a holographic puppet show called Lie Like Nobody's Watching, aired to 0 viewers. The ministry buildings were repurposed into libraries, confession booths, jazz bars, and awkward public gardens full of failed sculptures. The final minister of fabrication retired, reportedly muttering, "At least I made people feel good." His statue now weeps maple syrup on warm days. The world didn't end. It just got weird. In the aftermath of the regime's collapse and the slow, patchy rehabilitation of truth, society did what it does best. It adapted awkwardly. Not gracefully, not coherently, but with the relentless persistence of a cat trying to open a door it has no reason to believe leads anywhere interesting. Truth, once a radioactive substance handled only by professional narrative technicians in full emotional hazmat gear, became common. Not glamorous, not glorious, just part of the scenery. Like public benches, or awkward text messages from exes. People began telling the truth the same way they once lied. Habitually, sloppily, sometimes for fun, sometimes because it was easier. Governments didn't vanish, but they stopped pretending to be omniscient. The new Ministry of Possibly Useful Statements released official documents titled, "What We Think is Happening," based on current evidence, subject to revision. Press conferences ended with the phrase, "Please verify independently." We might be tired. Children were no longer taught to always tell the truth. That would be too extreme. Instead, they were taught to ask, "Why am I saying this?" before speaking. It didn't reduce lying. It just made it more interesting. Advertising had to change, of course. Slogans like, "This product might disappoint you less than your last 3 purchases," became weirdly effective. A perfume ad read, "You'll probably still feel lonely, but at least you'll smell mysterious." It sold out instantly. Dating apps introduced a truth mode, where users had to write bios that included things like, "I chew loudly," or "I once cried watching an insurance commercial." Oddly, the success rate of first dates improved by 47%. Art flourished. Without the burden of deception or the obligation of perfect transparency, creators were free to make things that were messy, paintings that admitted they didn't know what they were about, films that ended halfway through because the director got bored, songs with lyrics like, "I'm singing this to feel alive, and I don't care if it's catchy." People still lied. Of course they did. Sometimes to protect someone. Sometimes to avoid confrontation. Occasionally just because the truth was too exhausting. But the difference was, it wasn't the rule anymore. It was just another tool. Like sarcasm. Or spreadsheets. And truth learned humility. It stopped showing up with trumpets and declarations. It arrived quietly. In eye contact that lasted a second too long. In the confession that, "Actually, I don't understand this either." In silence, where once there had been filler noise. A new holiday was created, the Day of Maybes. No declarations, no slogans. Just a full day when people were encouraged to say, "I don't know." It became oddly comforting. An entire planet taking a collective breath of doubt. There were still extremists, of course. The radical honesty movement insisted on absolute transparency and were promptly banned from most dinner parties. The Retroliar Coalition tried to revive curated falsehoods, but their fundraising emails accidentally told the truth about their accounting practices, and they disbanded after being audited by volunteers. And somewhere, in a park, the old man who used to speak to squirrels returned. This time, people listened, not because they believed him, but because they didn't need to. They just wanted to hear someone tell a story without trying to sell them anything. That was enough. And now, dear listener, here we are. At the end of a long, winding, ridiculous, tragicomic exploration of what it might mean to live in a world where lies were law and truth was rebellion. But before you go, let me leave you with one uncomfortable, exhilarating possibility. What if we've already been living like that? What if the real fantasy wasn't that lies ruled the world, but that we ever truly believed they didn't? What if, right now, you're already deciding which truths to hide and which lies to wear like armor? And what if, just maybe, the next time you open your mouth, you try saying the one thing you've been avoiding? Or not? After all, this is What If Horizons, where nothing is ever certain, but everything is fair game. If you enjoyed this strange little adventure into the absurd machinery of truth and fiction, don't forget to follow the podcast, share it with your friends, especially the ones who lie about listening to podcasts, and leave a brutally honest review. Yes, even if it's just the words, it was fine. Until next time, stay curious, stay weird, and try not to lie too well. You might start believing it.